Bağlangan yollan içmudun sen hey Uygur Biraz kalgan kanun qayerda kalgandır Ecdatla öz kinini tökken vatanning yolda Sen oyla nime qilding vataningni saqlashqa Tur Uygur uyganım Uygur Yaz üzengnin felekni Vatanımın yolida Berzengnin dinini Yersun Uygur millet Azatni körsün evlat Şerq Türkistan yerini Kıl azat bulsun azat Kıl azat bulsun azat
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to another special episode of Talk East Turkestan. Today I have with me Alison Killing. Alison Killing is a licensed architect and geospatial analyst who uses maps and data to investigate urgent social issues. She worked in architecture and urban planning practices in London and Rotterdam for several years before starting her own studio, Killing Architects. Most recently, in 2001, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for international reporting together with Miga Rajagopalan and Christo Bushek for a series of articles which we've all seen in BuzzFeed for exposing the network of detention camps in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. I'd like to welcome to our stream today. Welcome, Alison. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I hope I've introduced you correctly and truthfully today. We sort of know you, and if you guys haven't read upon those articles that I've just mentioned, especially those satellite imagery that you may have seen, that link is in the description, and you can see all the amazing work that Alison has done. Just sort of before we get into, I've sort of invited Alison to the show because we've recently seen sort of a confirmation of images by a brave Chinese man who took, on the ground images of those camps, which you guys found. I just want to start off, what was the method that you used to find those camps in the first place?
Yeah, so we discovered that there was censorship in Baidu. We discovered that at places where there were known camps, that when you zoomed in on Baidu's satellite imagery, this white square would pop up. And then you would zoom in further and it would disappear. So at first it just looked a little bit like the map was broken or something. But I sort of zoomed out and zoomed in again and realized that actually this was replicable and it wasn't just sort of a fault with poor bandwidth or the website being broken, that this potentially actually was, that this was something strange. And then when I went and had a look at a series of other places that we already knew were camps and found the same thing that was happening there, it seemed like, oh wow, that it looks like there's some censorship happening there, and that we might be able to track that censorship and use that to find the rest of the network. And so by mapping all of the locations where we could see these like blank tiles, and then going and looking at another satellite imagery provider which wasn't censored, like Google Earth, we could find out what was there. And that was the basic technique that we used to find what we believe is close to being the full network of camps.
So, I mean, looking at what you've said, could we argue that essentially China helped find the camps for us? They've essentially, in censoring those areas, they've essentially given you the geolocations of the camps.
Yeah, I mean, it was really ironic, that in sort of like making this map, sort of like showing up all of the places that they wanted to hide, that they actually showed us where to look. And I mean, what we discovered when we started to look at all of the mask tile locations was that there were lots and lots of different places that were censored in this way. So the mask tiles would cover areas like, like solar power stations and like arrays of solar panels or wind farms, electricity substations, industrial estates, also military bases, and then of course the camps and prisons across the region.
Could you sort of explain to us what these different colors represent on the map? Because sort of Guangdong was using that to sort of find his way around. Yeah.
So after we had found all of the locations using satellite imagery, what we needed to do was try and corroborate as many as we could. And we did that in a number of ways. So sometimes we would have an eyewitness. We would have spoken to an ex-detainee who could show us on Google Maps, like, this is the place that I was held, and we could corroborate in that way. Sometimes there would be media reports about a certain camp, and sometimes we would have a government document, like a tender document or an advert for guards to work at the camp, and these documents often would have the address of the camp, and so we could corroborate that way. So I can't remember which colour is which offhand, but one set of those locations is then corroborated in that way. And then there's like the next level of certainty down was where we had only been able to use the satellite imagery to verify, but where there were really, really clear features which identified these places as camps, where we could see these really thick perimeter walls. And I don't just mean like the 30 centimeter thick wall that you might find around a school or an apartment complex. I mean a perimeter wall that was a meter and a half to 2 meters thick, 7 meters high, and has a walkway on top which guards can use to patrol. So these thick perimeter walls, guard towers, and then layers of barbed wire on either side of those walls. So if we saw those sorts of things, we'd say, like, we think that this is a camp, and we have a very high degree of certainty based on the satellite imagery. And then there was the next level down where the evidence was strong, but not quite as strong as with the facilities with this very, very high degree of security. So it would be a slightly lower security facility, and there we would be seeing things like barbed wire passageways which led between buildings, and barbed wire pens in courtyards and adjacent to buildings. And those were sort of, we said with those, we think like there's a very high probability. So that's what the different colors mean.
So what was your reaction when you saw Guangwen's video? Obviously it came out about a month and a half ago, but it only sort of got traction only recently.
Yeah, so I only learned about it at the start of last week. I mean, I was amazed when I saw it, and in a number of ways. We don't have very much material like what he's produced, so it's really quite unique, and that was very special. I mean, I think the thing that sort of impressed me most as well was just like his bravery in what he did. So I know that, like, initially when he was at the start of the video, he visits a couple of camps where he's able to just drive past in his car, and I think already being there to do that took a certain amount of courage. But later on in the video, and in the segment that you're showing just now, when he went to Dabancheng, I think there was a huge amount of personal risk in visiting that place, because there was no way that he could claim that he wasn't just driving past. There's no way that he could claim that he was a tourist who got lost. There was nothing else that he could have been doing there apart from being there to film the camp. And so if he had been caught, there could have been very real consequences. And so I was incredibly impressed by his courage. And then, like, I think we need to talk as well about just how useful the material that he's provided is. So it's useful in a number of ways. It's always fantastic to have material that is shot from the ground, because that you can match with satellite imagery. Because when you're looking at satellite imagery, you're looking at things from above, there's a certain amount of abstraction. And having ground level imagery of the same place helps you to confirm that what you thought you were looking at, that really is the thing that you're looking at. And then what it also did was to help us corroborate a number of locations. And there were quite a few of these places that we didn't have other corroborating evidence. We didn't have an eyewitness report or a media visit or a tender document. And so him going and visiting these places was incredibly useful because it corroborated that those places really were camps and prisons.
The argument that I've been getting on social media is, well, so what? He's just filmed a bunch of prisons. There are prisons in all countries. What do you say to those people that make those sort of comments?
Yeah. I think that the things that we need to, there's a few things that we can point to respond to that. The first one that I would point out is just the hugely disproportionate amount of detention space that exists in Xinjiang. So earlier this year, Mega and I did a story where we looked at the capacity of all of the facilities that were built or have been significantly extended since mid-2016, which is when the campaign of detention started. And so what I did was to draw I drew all of these places and calculated the gross floor area, calculated the square footage. And then we used Chinese prison building regulations to reverse engineer what the capacity of those places was likely to be. And we came to a figure of 1,014,000 people, which is just an absolutely stunning number when you consider that Xinjiang only has a population of 25 million people. So in these facilities, which have been built or massively extended since 2016, there is space to hold 1 in 25 of Xinjiang's population. That doesn't take into account overcrowding, and we know that there's overcrowding in those places. And it doesn't count all of the facilities which existed pre-2016 either. So that's the main thing that I point to when people say, like, yeah, but there's prisons everywhere. It's like, yes, there are, but not like this, not to anything like this extent.
So obviously you guys initially found these maps because of Beidou's censorship. What do you think Beidou's going to do now? Do you think they'll light them up again, like for their own credibility, or have those maps changed, or are they still censored? Are there still white spots?
So Baidu, the material in Baidu Maps has changed since we first started this work. We first noticed that these white squares were appearing. It was about 3 years ago. It was like September 2018 that we discovered this. In, I think, sort of last year, around in spring last year, we noticed that actually a lot of the white squares that had previously been there had disappeared. Also, and changes to Baidu aren't just about censorship. They might also be sort of upgrading their service for the benefit of their users, sort of providing higher resolution satellite imagery in urban areas, which is one thing that we saw that they'd added. But they have changed their service, and I think that the work that we did using those mask tiles, I don't think that it's still possible to do that.
You've obviously got this great thread, comparing and sort of corroborating the work that you guys did with Guangguan's footage. Obviously, you guys were doing this to sort of, make it so that the propagandists or the Chinese government themselves can no longer deny the existence of these camps or the capacity that they're at. Has there been a response by the Chinese government? And if so, how has that been? And what sort of messages are you getting?
I haven't heard any formal response to the video, and I haven't had any formal response to the thread that I wrote either. No, I mean, I've had some questions, as you already asked about, but why shouldn't China have prisons, and is this really excessive? And I've answered them as I just did now. Yeah, we haven't had like a huge. We've had a few questions on social media, but we haven't had like sort of formal responses to what we put out there.
What's the hope now? Because obviously we've been, as Uyghurs, as activists, as researchers, we've been calling, most governments have labeled this a genocide. There is mass imprisonment, mass incarceration of millions in camps. Where to from now? Because obviously you can only give out so much evidence. China's not letting anybody in. Do you think China, there will be room for unfettered access or calls for it? What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Wow. I don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, the UN has consistently been asking for access to the region to carry out inspections of the camps. I think that sort of transparency would be great. I have no idea what's coming next.
We've got a question from Ali or AL44. They're asking, are these places in general more focused on imprisonment, re-education, or forced labor? Do you guys have any information on this?
I mean, I think detention is the main focus of these camps. There's definitely a sort of education component, and there's also a forced labor component. The forced labor part is maybe clearest. We know that there are different categories of detainee within the camps, from sort of low security to medium and higher, and it's only the sort of lowest security detainees are allowed to sort of move around the camp compound and go to the factories where they're engaged in forced labor. Of the camps that we've looked at, we've located like 347 locations where there are, and that's compounds, and they might contain multiple camps and prisons and detention centres. But of the places that we found, there were 135 of them that had where we could identify factories within the compound, and that's indicative of forced labour. In terms of education or re-education, I mean, I guess the first thing to say is like the Chinese government's claims about what people need educating or re-educating in is, they've claimed that we're providing Mandarin classes and we're providing skills to these people, when in fact many of these people already speak fluent Mandarin, and many are highly educated and very highly skilled. There's many academics and doctors and imams and very successful business people who have been detained in the camps, and those people aren't in need of education. I mean, what we have heard as well from former detainees is that they do often spend their days sort of studying isn't quite the right word. Being forced to read and watch propaganda is a better description of it. Often for hours at a time, that people would be expected to be studying Xi Jinping's speeches and be getting shouted at over loudspeakers if they get distracted or start slouching and things.
I'm not sure whether your research on this has continued or just stopped from 2020, but do you see from your research, is there an increase in the number of camps, or are camps really being closed down and they're being architected into different sort of buildings?
So we haven't seen a lot of evidence that they're being closed. So just to sort of go through the timeline, like this mass detention program started in sort of mid to late 2016. We saw a huge amount of camps opening in 2017, and also a lot of construction work. So that was both schools and hospitals, existing buildings that were being converted to camps. and also new construction of these like permanent, much higher security facilities. And then like that continued through 2018, and 2018 was really, it was like slightly higher than what we saw in 2017. And then after that, it started to tail off a little bit. But I think in large part because they were starting to reach the maximum capacity that they actually needed. So through 2019, there were fewer places built, but the places that were built were these really big, high security prisons. Many of them were big enough to hold, say, 10,000 people. At the end of 2019, the governor of Xinjiang made this announcement that all of the prisons, that all of the camps were now closed. And yet, at the same time, we could see in satellite imagery that there were several of these places that had just completed or were nearing completion. So we can be very skeptical about Chinese government claims that they've closed. There were a few more that were built in 2020, and we've seen one or two more in 2021. So it's definitely slowing down. But I think that's because Xinjiang just doesn't need any more prisons. It's got a huge amount already. It's not because this program of detention is stopping. And what we've also seen, is from sort of mid-2017 and into 2018, what has been happening is that these places became much bigger, much higher security, and much more permanent. We called our series "Built to Last" because that's what these places were. Like they've been built to last.
Is there anything? Is this research ongoing? Is there anything else relating to this that's coming up? Obviously, your work has been recognized, and you guys have won a Pulitzer Prize for it.
Yeah, we're still working on it.
Yeah.
I can't talk too much about what we're doing,
Yeah.
but we hope to be publishing some new articles, in the next month and shortly into the new year as well.
Obviously, we also have a Uyghur audience as well. We all appreciate the work that any of the researchers like you do. Do you have a special message for Uyghur people?
Oh God. I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, honestly, I'm absolutely horrified by what is happening in that region. I can't imagine what it must be like to have family and friends detained in these places. And I hope that, all of the work that we're doing, whether, activists or journalists or researchers, policymakers, I hope that it starts to have some real impact. And, I would like to see the camps closed and those people reunited with their families and given a chance to heal.
Just one more question. You mentioned policymakers. What has been their reaction? Do they take it on board? Because obviously we see, certain governments, certain political parties, sort of step back or go forward. Like they see your evidence. What's the mood in some of these places, whether it be the UK or what have you had experience in that realm?
No, not really.
Yeah.
No, not really. I don't personally have direct contacts with those people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that people have sort of messaged us on Twitter and have reached out to us to say like, oh, we read your articles and it was really, really informative. It really helped us to understand what was happening there. And that's really good to see, to know that it's helping to inform people to make good decisions. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Alison, for giving us your time. Again, everybody, you can read Alison's work. There's a link in the description below. And you can obviously go onto her Twitter account. It's right there on her name, at Alison Killing. And yeah, share the work, get that information. If you do have the capacity to reach out to more powerful people, get that information out there, and hopefully it makes a difference. Any final words, Alison, before we close off this stream?
No, just thanks so much for having me and for this conversation.
Thank you so much. We'll say our goodbyes after this. I'm just going to play a short clip, and then we'll say our goodbyes after I end the broadcast. I just want to thank everybody for listening in today. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe and get this message out there. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halkım, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu güreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, biz